My mother stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, wine glass raised, smiling like she was about to give a toast worthy of applause. Instead, she destroyed me with one sentence. "I have 2 daughters," she said proudly. "One is a famous lawyer, and the other, well, we don't all turn out successful." Everyone laughed. Even my sister. That was the moment I stopped being her failure. That was the moment I decided to ruin everything she built. Stick with me. My name is Maris Holloway. I'm 28. Quiet, yes, but not weak. I restore antique furniture for a living. Old tables, broken cabinets, hand-carved chairs people throw away. I bring them back to life. My family calls it glorified sanding. My older sister, Corinne, is the opposite of me in their eyes. She's 33, a high-profile corporate attorney. Perfect suits. Perfect hair. Perfect reputation. My mother, Lenora, worships that image like it's a religion. Status means everything to her. Appearances are her oxygen. My dad, Dale, just stays quiet. He always has. Silence is his favorite escape. Thanksgiving dinner that year was at my mother's upscale suburban house. Everything looked like a magazine cover: gold cutlery, crystal glasses, expensive wine. Corinne's framed awards covered the walls like wallpaper. None of my things were there. Not my childhood paintings. Not the art prizes I won. Those were boxed in the attic years ago. During dinner, the comparisons started, like always. Aunt Jolene laughed awkwardly when my mother praised Corinne's latest court victory. Uncle Barrett nodded like he was at a business seminar. Cousin Kellen kept staring at his plate. Then Corinne leaned toward me with that sweet, fake smile. "You're still doing crafts?" she asked softly. "Crafts." I smiled back, but my chest felt tight. After a few minutes, I excused myself and went toward the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard them. My mother and Corinne. Laughing. Lenora was talking about my financial struggles, like I was a charity case. Then she said something that made my hands go cold. She'd been helping Corinne buy investment property. Quietly. Using money from a fund that was supposed to be for both of us. Not emotional betrayal. Financial. Planned. That's when something inside me shifted. Because I knew something about Corinne's career. Something no one else at that table knew. Something dangerous. I went back to the dining room. Sat down calmly. And for the first time all night, I smiled. Not hurt. Not broken. Calculating. I went back to my apartment that night, if you could even call it that. It was a small rented space above my workshop. The smell of varnish and old wood lived in the walls. Half-finished furniture pieces stood around like silent company. Usually, restoring things calmed me. Fixing broken pieces made the world feel fixable. But not that night. My mother's words kept replaying in my head. Failure. I sat on the floor beside my work table and stared at an old storage box. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were pieces of a life I walked away from: law school books, research notes, old ID cards. People think I quit law school because it was too hard. That's the story my family tells. The truth is uglier. I was doing well. Really well. I worked on a research paper about corporate liability law, months of work. Late nights. No sleep. I trusted Corinne and shared my drafts with her. She said she was proud of me. A few weeks later, her firm published a legal brief using my research. My words. My case analysis. My structure. Her name was on it. Mine wasn't. When I confronted her, she called it a misunderstanding. Said I should be happy my work helped her career. I dropped out soon after. I couldn't stay in a world that already erased me. Back in the present, I opened the bottom of the box and found what I was looking for: a small black flash drive. Years ago, Corinne had asked me to help organize files for one of her big corporate cases. I handled document sorting, timelines, internal memos. That's when I first saw things that didn't add up. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Old folders opened. Dates. Financial logs. Email chains. I started reading. Slowly at first. Then faster. There were corporate filings tied to her biggest client, Kessler Biotech. Numbers didn't match across reports. Money had been transferred through shell accounts. Then I saw the safety reports. Original lab results showed toxic exposure risks. Neurological damage in early testing. But the filed versions were altered, risks minimized, language softened. Internal memos told the real story. Executives discussing containment. Lawyers discussing liability shielding. And Corinne's name was on multiple approval chains. My stomach turned when I reached the case summary. She had argued in court that no communities were harmed. That exposure levels were safe. But the internal documents proved otherwise. Evidence had been buried, suppressed, hidden on purpose. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't about a dinner insult anymore. This was about people who might have been hurt. Families who never knew the truth. I didn't want revenge just because my mother called me a failure. I wanted exposure. Christmas lights hung over Lenora's perfectly decorated living room, twinkling like nothing could ever go wrong. She called me on the phone that morning, her voice sharp and sweet at the same time. "Maris, you'll be at dinner, won't you? Family needs to see you." I said yes politely. I always said yes. But this time, I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't going there to please anyone. Not anymore. Corinne, of course, was already there, all smiles and holiday cheer. But I noticed the slight tightening around her eyes when I walked in. She's used to being the favorite. She's used to controlling the room. But my calm, polite attitude made her uneasy. I was there physically, but my mind was elsewhere. Afterwards, I met with Gideon Pike. He used to work at Corinne's law firm, a bright paralegal who vanished after a quiet, suspicious firing. Gideon and I had kept in touch, though carefully. I trusted him. We sat in a small cafe with the hum of espresso machines around us. I handed him the flash drive, and he nodded as he examined the files. "They changed the documents," he said quietly. "These aren't just mistakes. Someone deliberately altered safety reports, financial logs, and internal memos." I leaned forward. "Did Corinne know?" Gideon hesitated. Then he handed me a folder. Court filings, emails, and memos stacked neatly. She personally argued in court that no families were harmed. But look at this. Internal reports show children suffered neurological damage from the exposure. My hands shook slightly. I read through the memos again and again, feeling the weight of what had been done. The lawsuits were buried, settlements quietly handled, and public statements made to erase the harm. I realized then that humiliation at the dinner table wasn't enough. My mother's laughter, Corinne's smirks, those were small cracks in the foundation. What mattered was the truth. Families had been misled. People were at risk. And Corinne had used her power to hide it. I looked up at Gideon. "This isn't just about my life or our family anymore," I said quietly. "This needs to go public. People deserve to know." For the first time, I felt a clear direction, a plan forming. I wouldn't just take back my dignity. I would reveal the truth, quietly but fully. Corinne might think she's untouchable, but the law has its cracks. And now, so do I. I didn't expect to find anything new when I called my parents that weekend. But what I heard made my stomach drop. They were talking, unaware I was in the next room. My father's voice sounded hesitant, my mother's sharp and confident as always. "I still can't believe she never questioned it," Lenora said, sipping her tea. "She never knew," Dale admitted. "She trusted us. She thought she refused the inheritance herself." That's when it clicked. I remembered the stories my mother had told me for years. How the money from my late grandfather's estate was supposedly offered to me, and how I chose not to take it. I had accepted that lie, silently angry but powerless. But now the truth became clear. My mother hadn't just misrepresented it. She had forged the paperwork. While I was away at law school, buried in books and trying to find my own path, she signed my name. Manipulated the documents to make it look like I turned the inheritance down. All that money, meant for both of us, had gone to Corinne. It fueled her career, her law firm partnership, her lavish lifestyle. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a deliberate erasure of me from my own family's wealth, from opportunities that could have changed my life. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. My life had been measured against Corinne's success, my worth minimized in every family conversation. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. It wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was financial control, legal erasure, and calculated deceit. I went to my apartment and pulled out my growing stack of documents. There were emails, financial records, and memos from Corinne's cases. And now, I added the new evidence. The forged inheritance papers, scanned copies of the altered signatures, and notes from my overheard conversation. Each paper told a story. Each line proved a truth my family wanted to hide. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This wasn't small jealousy. This was systematic, intentional. And I would not let it stand. I carefully filed everything together, organizing it with the precision of someone who had spent years restoring broken things. Only now, the things I was fixing were not tables or chairs. They were truths, hidden and broken by greed. I leaned back and exhaled. The weight of the discovery pressed down, but it also sharpened my purpose. It was no longer about being called a failure at dinner. It was about reclaiming what was mine, exposing what was hidden, and finally standing up against calculated lies. The night Corinne announced her engagement, the house was glittering. Chandeliers reflected off polished floors, and every corner smelled of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Guests murmured in admiration, glasses clinking. My mother, Lenora, stood next to her, eyes shining. "This," she said proudly to the room, "is what success looks like." I stood quietly in the corner, watching. Corinne's smile was perfect, her laugh bright and rehearsed. People congratulated her, some raising their glasses, others whispering about the power couple she was about to become. I sipped my drink slowly, careful not to draw attention, letting her glow fill the room while I stayed invisible. Later, I found a quiet moment outside on the terrace. Brennan Voss, tall, polished, and nervous in his tailored suit, stepped out behind me. He seemed hesitant, as if walking into a room full of my mother's pride weighed on him. I wanted to be honest," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. I tilted my head, waiting. He swallowed. Corinne insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Something about protecting certain liabilities. I didn't fully understand it, but signing it felt strange. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. My heart skipped. That was confirmation. She wasn't just protecting wealth. She was expecting potential problems. She knew she might face lawsuits or exposure. I nodded politely, letting the wind cool my face. Brennan didn't need to know everything. Not yet. Inside, the celebration went on. Laughter, champagne, the clinking of forks against plates. But in my mind, I was no longer just Maris Holloway, the quiet sister, the failure at every family dinner. I was thinking ahead, planning. This was the moment to act carefully. Corinne's world was fragile beneath the surface, built on appearances and carefully managed reputations. She had planned for wealth and social status, but she hadn't accounted for truth being revealed. I went back inside and smiled at her as she passed. Warm, sweet, unassuming. She had no idea. The pieces were in place. I had documents, evidence, witnesses, and now insight into her strategy. Everything could be brought down without anyone seeing me coming. I would not humiliate her with anger or public attacks. This would be a controlled detonation, precise, deliberate, and undeniable. Tonight, the engagement was celebrated. Tomorrow, the foundation she had built on lies would be tested. And I would be ready. I met Elias Rowan on a rainy afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. He had a reputation for digging into corporate corruption and making people in power uncomfortable. His eyes were sharp, scanning everything like he already knew what I was about to show him. I laid out the documents on the table, altered memos, financial records, and testimony drafts Corinne had suppressed. Each paper felt heavier than the last, a reminder of the lies and manipulation that had shaped my life. Elias leaned in, his brow furrowed. "This is explosive," he said, flipping through the files. "If this gets out, it could ruin a lot of people." "I know," I said calmly. My hands didn't shake, even though my heart was pounding. "It's not about revenge. It's about truth." He nodded, but his expression turned serious. "You have to be careful. Powerful firms like this don't go down quietly. They fight back, legally, financially, and sometimes worse." I met his gaze and didn't flinch. I had spent years being quiet, underestimated, called a failure. I wasn't afraid anymore. After a long conversation, we agreed on a plan. Elias would start investigating further, cross-check the documents, and line up witnesses. I would provide whatever he needed to make the story airtight. It had to be undeniable. That night, I got a call from my mother. Lenora's voice was sweet but clipped. "Maris, you need to apologize," she said. "Everyone can see the resentment you're carrying. One more dinner, that's all. Make peace." I paused, letting her words hang in the air. She thought she could shame me, make me feel guilty again, make me shrink back into her version of acceptable. "Fine," I said evenly. "I'll attend. One more dinner." I hung up and looked at the files on my desk. The weight of them no longer felt like a burden. It felt like power. Careful power, precise power, hidden from everyone but the people who needed to see it. Lenora thought she was in control, that she could dictate how I acted, how I felt, even how I spent my own time. But I was already working behind the scenes, aligning my pieces, setting up the truth like a chain reaction no one could stop. The next family dinner would happen. I would smile. I would be polite. And beneath it all, I would be ready. Because in the shadows, allies were working, evidence was solid, and the moment to act was coming. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, and the sound of laughter filled the air as I walked into the family gathering. Lenora was in her element, standing at the head of the table with that proud smile, her eyes sparkling as she praised Corinne. "Look at my daughter," she said loudly. "Everything she does is perfect. Truly remarkable." Everyone nodded, raising their glasses. Corinne smiled, basking in the attention, unaware of the storm quietly forming around her. I could feel the tension in the air, but I stayed calm. This time, I decided to play along. I smiled politely at my mother and said, "Thank you, Mom, for always believing in the truth." I let my words hang there, carefully chosen, polite but pointed. Corinne's smile faltered slightly. She glanced at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. I could see her wondering what I meant, but she couldn't figure it out. As the dinner continued, I quietly observed. My family chatted, praised each other, and ate without noticing the change in energy at the table. To everyone else, it was just another holiday meal. But under the surface, the game was changing. Meanwhile, Elias was finishing up his article. He had spent days confirming every detail, cross-checking documents, and lining up testimony from whistleblowers. Gideon was the final piece. Once he gave the last confirmation, the story would go live. A full, undeniable report exposing Corinne's role in the toxic exposure case and the corporate cover-up. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to show anger or confront anyone. All that was left was waiting for the moment to reveal the truth. Corinne, of course, couldn't see it. She was used to controlling situations, predicting how people would react. But she had never faced me like this, calm, quiet, and in control. She sensed something, a subtle shift, a difference in my tone, in my expressions. But she couldn't pinpoint it. I sipped my wine, nodded politely when someone asked a question, and smiled when my mother praised Corinne again. All the while, I felt a strange sense of power, quiet and steady. By the end of the evening, nothing seemed to have changed. To the family, I was still the quiet, polite sister. But behind the scenes, everything was ready. The article was nearly complete, and the whistleblower's confirmation was all that stood between Corinne and exposure. I left the dinner knowing the countdown had begun. Soon, the truth wouldn't be hidden anymore, and everything Corinne had built on lies would start to crumble. The morning the article went live, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. I didn't check it immediately. I poured coffee, watched the steam curl, and let myself breathe. The world was about to change, but I stayed calm. When I finally looked, my phone was full of notifications. Messages from news outlets, friends, and strangers. The headline was everywhere. Corporate counsel withheld evidence in toxic exposure case. Corinne's name was front and center. Every email, every memo, every falsified document was listed. The report included court filings, internal communications, and proof that settlements had been manipulated. Families harmed by exposure finally had confirmation of what they had suspected, and the public now knew too. I didn't feel joy. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that truth had been restored. No cheering, no gloating. Just the calm of knowing what was right had come to light. Brennan Voss, who had looked uneasy about the prenuptial, called it off almost immediately. He didn't want to be tied to someone whose career and integrity were suddenly under scrutiny. I read the news quietly, taking note but not celebrating. Corinne's law firm moved quickly, placing her on leave while the investigation continued. Her perfect image, the one my mother had praised endlessly, began to crack publicly. Lenora was blindsided. Calls, emails, and messages of shock flooded her social circle. Her social status, built on appearances and her daughter's success, was shaking. And yet I said nothing. I didn't post on social media. I didn't brag. I didn't confront. My work wasn't about public applause or revenge in front of everyone. It was about exposing lies and protecting truth. Through it all, I remained invisible. The world knew the truth about Corinne and the corporate cover-up, but no one knew I had been the one who quietly set it all in motion. I sat in my apartment, looking at the morning light on my desk, sipping my coffee. The weight of months of planning, of gathering documents and confirming evidence, was finally easing. I had remained calm, precise, and deliberate. This was the moment I had prepared for. Everything I had done, every small step, every careful move, had led here. Corinne faced the consequences of her actions. The firm faced scrutiny. And I was free from the shadow of being called a failure. I didn't need recognition. I had truth. And for me, that was enough. The tension in the house was thick when Lenora finally called me into her study. Her voice was sharp, controlled, but full of anger. Maris, how could you do this? Betray your own family? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I calmly set the stack of documents on her desk, letting them slide into place. This isn't betrayal, Mom, I said softly. It's the truth. Lenora's eyes widened as she saw the forged inheritance papers. The signatures, the altered financial records, everything she had tried to hide for years was now undeniable. Dale, my father, finally spoke up, his voice low. I knew. I just didn't want conflict. I thought if we stayed quiet, things would be easier. Easier for him. Easier for Corinne. Easier for Lenora to maintain her perfect image. Easier to erase me. Corinne burst into the room next, her face pale, her hands trembling. You've ruined everything, she shouted. My career, my life, my engagement. How could you do this? I looked at her steadily. You built your life on mine, I said. Every partnership, every advancement, every opportunity you had was because of what I was denied. You and Mom erased me, and now the truth is here. Lenora's perfectly polished world began to crumble around her. Her friends, who once envied her success and status, started calling and texting. Invitations vanished. Conversations she thought private leaked to the right ears. Her social circle, the one she had protected and curated for decades, began to distance itself. Corinne's law license was under review, and disbarment hearings were set. The firm she had proudly worked for now scrutinized her every decision. The engagement to Brennan was over. Her public image, meticulously maintained, was tarnished. I stood quietly, watching the family I grew up with unravel. Not with joy, not with revenge, but with a calm certainty. The illusions they had built, of perfection, of superiority, of control, had no foundation. They had relied on lies and manipulation, and now the truth had surfaced. For the first time, I didn't feel like the failure at the table. I felt like someone who had reclaimed her place, not through shouting or confrontation, but through careful planning and truth. The Holloway family, at least the one they pretended to be, no longer existed. And I was free. Free from their judgment, free from their favoritism, free from their control. I turned and left the study, calm, steady, and finally in control of my own life. Months passed, and the changes were undeniable. Corinne's law license was suspended pending the investigation, and the civil suits tied to the toxic exposure case were piling up. The firm she had once stood proudly in was now watching her every move, their trust in her shattered. Lenora tried to reach me. At first, it was short, nervous messages. Then came phone calls. Her tone had changed, no longer sharp or proud, but careful, almost pleading. Maris, I just want to make things right, she said one evening. Can we talk? For family. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her words. I declined. My life was no longer controlled by their illusions or their attempts to manipulate me. Instead, I focused on the future I wanted to build. Using a portion of the legal settlement from whistleblower protections, I invested in my restoration business. What had started as a small workshop grew into a full design studio. Tables, cabinets, chairs. I didn't just repair furniture anymore. I created spaces, blending restoration with modern design. My work spoke for itself. A former client wrote a glowing review online, praising the craftsmanship and attention to detail. Unlike the hollow praise from my family, this recognition felt real. It wasn't about who I was related to or how successful my sister was. It was about me, my skills, and my dedication. The biggest change, though, was internal. I no longer felt the weight of their judgment, their comparisons, or their favoritism. I had taken control of my own life, my own choices, and my own happiness. That Thanksgiving, I hosted a small dinner in my new studio. There were no relatives, no staged smiles, no comparisons. Just the friends I had chosen, people who supported me, and Gideon, who had been a steady ally through everything. The lights were soft, the food simple but comforting, and laughter filled the space in a way that felt easy, natural. I raised my glass, looking at the faces around me, and spoke quietly. I have one life, I said, calm and steady. And it's mine. No one clapped. No one compared me to anyone else. No one tried to humiliate me. Just control. For the first time, I understood what it meant to live for myself. Not for approval, not for status, not for family illusions. For me. And in that moment, it felt like freedom. This story shows the power of patience, careful planning, and standing up for truth. If you face manipulation or favoritism, Document everything, seek expert guidance, and protect your rights. Learn how to reclaim control of your life calmly, ethically, and effectively. Your dignity and future are worth it.